Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we have Nicole Christensen. Nicole is an OG of the CrossFit community, having been an owner of CrossFit Roots out in Boulder for over a decade. She is also part of the L1 staff with CrossFit and has been for a number of years, as well as being one of the Jedi Knights that can call themselves an L4 coach. She is also now working with CrossFit to help with their coaches development program, kind of take coaching with CrossFit to the next level, try to actually make a career out of it. What are some of the things that she's doing to help implement a better, more robust coaching structure for those who look to have a career within the CrossFit path as a coach, as an owner? We were lucky enough to have Nicole come to one of our seminars back in 2017 at Roots. We talked a little bit about what her experience was like working with Power Monkey coaches and how that has actually influenced the way that she's doing things today. It was great to talk with Nicole. We definitely could do another episode with her, considering how involved she is with the sport, but we hope you guys enjoy this one.
Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Jamie and I'm here to talk to you about Restore, the newest event added to the Power Monkey series. Restore is an all-inclusive mindfulness and movement getaway happening this September. I am honored to be a keynote speaker at this event, and I hope you'll join me. We are going to cover breathwork, stretching, meditation. We will talk about holistic wellness and health. There will be nutrition lectures and tons of amazing food, as well as fitness opportunities. Just a really incredible chance to disconnect from life, to reconnect to ourselves, and to connect to each other. I hope you'll join us. You can learn more about Restore on the Power Monkey website. Hope to see you there.
Nicole, we're very excited to talk to you today. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Excellent.
Doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to start off with kind of I think a pretty powerful question, especially because you've been coaching for a while. You're part of the CrossFit seminar staff. You're a level 4 trainer, which is, maybe we should talk about that process a little bit later on, but it's very difficult to get to that point. I'm so impressed with level 4 CrossFit trainers, what you guys have learned, what you've been through that whole process. But is there anything as a coach that you assumed in the very beginning, movement wise, or with coaching in general in the beginning, that is very different now with your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the bigger ones that jumps out is just taking dynamic things and trying to create time under tension at transition points. And you can't expect somebody to do something fast and well and hit the positions if their only time with that flow is like a split second over and over. And it made sense to me, but I don't know if conceptually I knew that was the case, but once I saw people start to break it down and work the positions to link one start position to one end position or whatnot, that I definitely have a different thought process about now than when I started.
Sure.
And also too, maybe just, it's been so long, just, this is maybe part of an observational thing, but just watching all the athletes that I've worked with over the years and how, like, legitimately where they started and where they are now. I mean, I'm impressed by how it all comes together over time, and how all these little increments of progress, you don't really know how they're going to come together for somebody when it's year 10 or 11 or 12 into, their CrossFit or whatever they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. I'm still always surprised when I see someone improve even the slightest amount, like you get an extra inch of ankle range of motion. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, it makes sense that happened. They did a drill that works, but it's always still exciting and surprising to me. So I respect that you see that and you're still excited about that. I think all coaches should be excited about that and surprised, because I think it allows us to continue to push and to continue to experiment and all those things. But at what point in your coaching career did you come to this understanding that we need to separate the movement out, that we need to isolate certain positions, transition points, and then put the whole thing together? So how were you doing in the beginning? How has that changed, and when did it change?
Yeah, so I would say the foundation of that was I grew up swimming and coaching swimming, and there was a style of swim coaching called total immersion that really broke down the swim stroke in a way that I'd never seen. And I remember when I was coaching swimming, it was this aha moment. And then when I transitioned into coaching CrossFit, I remember that there was this, okay, you're learning all these different movements, and now there's this schizophrenia of I have to be able to coach all these different movements well. And I think it was, there was probably two phases. One was just learning about how to make a progression. And then, to be honest, I think it was like in 2017 or 16, we had the Power Monkey guys come, and we had Colin and Mike come and teach the Power Monkey course to our coaching staff. Mm-hmm. And it was like another level of connection of all these different pieces that I know to be true, whether it's like the CrossFit methodology, the way movement patterns happen, the way athlete development happens, that it just started tying it together at a deeper level where I started to understand the Olympic lifts in a way that was really rooted in gymnastics ability. I have this funny story. When Colin and Mike came to do the course, we were talking about transference of movement, and somehow it came up, about like overhead position and your ability to hold like a minute handstand was like, if you're thinking about being able to look at the receiving position of a snatch, or look at the receiving position and the overhead of a push jerk, and then shoulder stamina, and all these different things connecting. And so I actually was coaching Olympic lifting at the gym. I was substitute coaching the week after, and I had the whole class go and hold a handstand for a minute on the wall. And I think that like 4 people could do it. Mm-hmm. And it was just this, how can we expect people to hold these dynamic positions and receive in this like very small margin for error when, the basics, and it goes back to like that bigger conceptual thing of, work the basics and make the basics so polished over time that, it's interesting because like your understanding of a squat or a handstand, you can only get so deep with it as an athlete or as a coach a year into coaching it. Like it takes right. Like 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, and you're still having these aha moments because you just didn't have the exposure, the experience, or the visual on so many different people over the years to understand that movement at the next level. So I don't know, that was a long-winded way to answer your question, but I think probably the first part was just the whole transference piece of CrossFit and linking movement patterns. And then also, a lot of what Mike and Colin talked about with just how those two components of gymnastics and Olympic lifting really integrate and what that looks like on the coaching floor.
I think this is obviously you're speaking our language here, and it's something that we talk about nonstop, and it's basically how we teach all of our seminars, how we teach all of our clients. But I'm curious for you as a coach who's well rooted in the CrossFit community and has such a role in terms of how the curriculum is created and things like that. How do you take, and it's a question that we get quite a bit because we're always pushing so much as technique focus and make sure you're moving well before you move fast. Let's make sure we're thinking about longevity and all those important pieces. How do you take those technical pieces and try to get it across to a class within an hour where they're still engaged, where they're still coming in with the same mindset of I'm here to try to get a workout in and try to sweat and try to get through it? How do you make it interesting for them to be able to understand that the fundamentals and the technical components are as important as whatever that watt is for that day? Is there something that you found to be useful in trying to get that across a class?
Oh man, there are things that I think are useful, but I think in the long run, it's just a never ending focus on having the discussion. Mm-hmm. I know I've been guilty of this like over the years where, okay, we've taught nutrition. Everybody should know nutrition, or we've taught, the fundamentals of the end range of motion, in different planes of your elbow, with your elbow. We have to remember that our athletes' exposure to this isn't their main focus in their life. They've got mm-hmm. kids and they've got jobs and they've got other things that are going on. And And so the conversation has to be ongoing. And I use this example a lot, but when I taught seminars for a period of time, I taught seminars almost every single weekend. So every Sunday at 11 o'clock, I was listening to the nutrition lecture or giving it. And just that simple repetition of hearing that material over and over time drives you to make better choices and makes it be a larger player in your day-to-day life. And so I think that for our athletes, we have to recognize that, they're coming to the gym ideally 5 days a week. They have 5 hours. And so our starting point is we have to have that conversation with them all the time. So I think that's the overarching piece. In terms of on the gym floor, I think it's all the work that you put in beforehand. And so one of the beauties of a CrossFit class is that it has a variety of different skill levels all gathered together, right? And that provides a ton of inspiration. It has to be backed up though, where the coach provides a piece or a level of progression that's appropriate for every single person. And all of that work has to happen on the back end. And so, like today, I went to class today and we're doing weighted muscle ups with a med ball and then med ball cleans. It's a main site workout for CrossFit. Well, is everybody at the gym going to do a weighted muscle up? No, but the entire progression of how people are warming up is slowly sectioning off people to something that's appropriate and challenging so that they are sort of cornered into working at something that is at their level. So then the next step of when they go and they do the workout with intensity and they're really going for it, they've already been cornered in to something that's in a box, if you will, of what they can balance technique and intensity, rather than it being something like, oh, let's just see what you can do and go and go for it. And I think that there's a trust element too over the years. I mean, it's funny because we were cooling down in the parking lot and there was a woman who had just finished like her 3rd or 4th class. And she asked another woman like, oh, how long have you been coming here? And she said 8 years. She's like, oh, I can't believe you're doing those muscle ups with a ball. And she said, yeah, when I got here, I couldn't do a pull up or a dip. And I think that's when you've been successful, right?
Sure.
In a lot of ways. And so I think it's a lot of the work on the back end. And then I this sounds cheesy, but you truly have to believe that your athletes are completely capable of getting a muscle up or, getting a body weight snatch or being able to walk 100 feet on their hands. And then from that flows, okay, well, if they're going to be able to do that, you have to find ways that their technique is going to support that and not skip steps to get them there. But if they see other athletes do that, I do think that it becomes this waterfall effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I just want to branch off of that really quickly because I think it touches on a really important topic and something that Nicole, I know you're pushing really heavily right now in terms of coaches development and wanting to make being a CrossFit coach a career path and something that people can actually create a living off of and not feel like you got to sleep on the gym floor to be able to make this thing work. And I think a big piece of that is what you're saying is, you're doing muscle ups with a ball and you have 10 different skill levels within your group. Within the time you have to describe the workout, go through the warm up, you need to be able to describe what those scaling options are well. You need to describe why they're scaling options, how they actually create the same stimulus for that particular workout. And it's challenging when we have so many different things that we're trying to throw at a CrossFit coach that is trying to absorb and learn, but maybe isn't quite there yet. My question has to do with, and it's something that actually hit me when you were mentioning this, because we did a workout in the gym that I go to the other day, and we have really good coaching there. I love the programming, and we did muscle ups, and the coach went through a whole muscle up progression, but he taught strict muscle ups, the progression for strict muscle ups, but then in the workout, it was kipping muscle up. So when I just raised my hand, I said, are the muscle ups strict in the workout? He said, no, they're kipping. And there was a pretty big disconnect there of you're teaching, the cues that you're teaching are for a different variation of this movement. And he's a really good coach, but there was a disconnect there. And I think that happens quite a bit when you're talking about really complex movements. Sometimes you have coaches that on the surface level understand, but aren't able to answer the deeper questions to why that progression is in place, or why that different standard is being used, or things like that. How do you see that being? I know it's a challenge and it's something you're probably working on tackling. How do you see that as something that we can kind of bridge that gap between, and giving CrossFit coaches the tools to be able to have a wider range of progressions to pull from and to be able to implement them seamlessly, essentially? It's a huge ask, but I'm just curious.
It is. And it's like, when I think of my wants for the world, that's one of them.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think about the landscape of a CrossFit coach to start with. And like you pointed out, not only do they have to be proficient at teaching, the very, very basics of gymnastic and body weight movement patterns, but they have to be proficient at Olympic weightlifting and proficient at, these monostructural components. That's a pretty big ask. I mean, my 5-year-old has started doing, not competitive, but bigger practice gymnastics. And there's no way that I could go and just jump in and be like, okay, here, there's no way. And so our ask to begin with a CrossFit coach is a broad depth of knowledge on a variety of things. That doesn't mean that it's wrong or that we don't do it. It means, like, how do we support that better, right? And so, I mean, I think about, one is just the way that CrossFit coaches start. We want people doing, we want people being mentored. We want people going and learning from another coach. In the world of strength and conditioning at the collegiate level, you don't just go and get a head strength and conditioning coach at a gym or at a college program, right? You have an internship in college, and then after that, you go on to your next step, and then maybe you get a small team, and then you grow from there. And we need to create more opportunities for CrossFit coaches to have that type of experience, because that's one of the main ways that we grow as coaches. Is it's that constant day in, day out. So I think one is we need to provide more opportunities for coaches to be mentored in an ongoing environment. I think coursework is wildly important. And I mean, I've alluded to this to Mike Service numerous times, that, a lot of times people say, well, what can you get out of a weekend course? And you get aha moments. Like, that's the beauty of it, is you get these. It doesn't matter if you learn something new or if you learn something that solidifies that you like the pathway that you're coaching. Like, it's all going to a better place of you're developing as a coach. So I do think that in-person coursework, focused weekends, is an important component for any learning piece. And then I think, in terms of, I think study. I mean, I think there is an academic approach to coaching, and that academic approach is reading, whether it's in the CrossFit world of reading the methodology over and over in the same way, I have What is Fitness printed out, and I read it. I read it a lot, because, again, maybe you go to a weekend course and then you go back and you read What is Fitness, and you have you're like, oh, that makes sense. How I can apply this for this athlete, or this progression could be different. I mean, and so it's kind of those three areas. It's the in-person learning, it's coursework where you're spending dedicated weekends learning from experts. And then I think there's an academic element of reading. And then I think, lastly, I think a big sort of a sign that we're doing it right is, I mean, I take a lot from the gymnastics world, that I literally go to the, parent observatory thing when I pick up my kid, and I kind of watch what's going on. And it's very clear to me that there's this fine line of, you're not yet ready to do that. And I think the more that our coaches are able to have those positive conversations, it's not about the end skill. that end skill is the product of having all these pieces really refined along the way. And there's a confidence there from the coach to begin with, to be able to say like, hey, you know what? I see that you can do this one, but it's not as developed as the one before. So we just need to spend some more time here. And I think that's kind of the trickle down of those three pieces, if that's what it actually looks like then on the gym floor, in terms of how coaches are molding their athletes. And I think, yeah, I mean, I could go on about that, but I do think that there is, if we look to the strength and conditioning collegiate type world or any professional sports coaching arena, I do think that there's the possibility to move, the majority of our coaches to, this is their full-time thing, and this is what they do for a living.
And just to finish up on that one piece, that last sentence you said there about making it a full-time job and a career. I mean, if that became more of a possibility where you were getting a salary that allowed you to, put a down payment on a home and feel like you were secure, and it wasn't something you had to do on the side along with 3 other things just to be able to kind of make it work. Are there some things that you guys are doing now to try to help facilitate making that more of a reality? Anything that you guys think might push coaching to become more of a full-time opportunity for the coaches out there looking to do it and looking to say, hey, I'd love to be able to read books all night on this, but I can't because I have another job,
Right. And I don't know specifically, like, through the lens of the training and education, but I know, like, at Roots, I think I always come back to this possibility because I know that we've been able to make that possible. Mm-hmm. And so obviously there are a ton of different things at play. It's how you structure the business and how you structure your coaching hours and things like that. But it is completely possible to have full-time coaches that earn a good living, that do what they love, that are, they're not coaching 40 hours a week, because that's not sustainable. We all know that. But there are obviously a number of different pieces. It's how the business is set up. It's how it's run. It's how, what the trajectory is for a new coach coming online, and how they're molded. I think it's an interesting starting point. Like if you come on and, like we have our newer coaches, if, we hire somebody new, they basically co-coach, they shadow and co-coach for 6 months. So all their teaching is with another coach. It's not on their own. And that's kind of that time under tension of just being around it, right? Like, and we need to be able to start more of our coaches that way. If you look back to some of the early writings, like, professional training or scaling professional training, the CrossFit class evolved because out of a need, right? It started with one-on-one coaching and one-on-one training. And there's some beautiful things about, group class coaching, but obviously the demands on the coach are much greater. And I think that we need to acknowledge that as we bring people on, because there's a level of credibility too, right? Like, I mean, I kind of see it as like throwing somebody under the bus. Like if I have a coach that, comes fresh out of passing the level 1 course, and, the next weekend they're teaching a 20-person class, like that's just doing them a disservice. And it's not to say that they can't, get by, but it's a whole process to make sure that we're setting up coaches for success, so that, like you said, they continue to be inspired and motivated to want to move toward that full-time profession, rather than being like, oh man, this is hard at every angle. Yeah.
Throwing someone under the bus is the most common way that goes. I mean, I see that all the time. I've been guilty of it as an owner of a gym myself, just out of desperation. Like, I can't coach all these classes. I need someone to fill in. So that's usually the way that it goes. But I think if it's important for, owners, coaches to hold themselves to those standards. So I'm excited to hear that you require your coaches to shadow for 6 months. That's incredible. That's amazing. And it sounds like you're really taking this idea of the way that we should be easing our athletes into movements and teaching them with progression and stuff like that to the coaches. And certainly there's not enough owners and coaches out there doing that kind of thing. And there's so many things that you said that I want to dig into. I love how you're talking and everything else. But I want to bring us back a little bit to, you've talked a little bit about your experience with Power Monkey and the importance of kind of continuing education for these coaches and owners that want to make this a really full-time profession. And we, as Power Monkey, have always wanted to work with CrossFit. And so not replacing information. We've never said anything like that. And we stay away from that. We want to work with the information that CrossFit is putting out. We know how they teach, we know how they word things, and we always try in our wording and our teaching to build on that. So how would you say someone can benefit from being a part of a community like Power Monkey, along with going through the CrossFit level? So for example, how is a coach that goes through, level 1, level 2, level 3, and they're a level 4 trainer, but that's all that they do? How do you think that they can be better if they get some information and some teaching, some methods, some perspectives outside of just CrossFit with a company like Power Monkey?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from personal experience to start. I mean, I think that the CrossFit methodology has always been, we want what works, right? And so there are these principles that we fall back to, whether it's looking at hip extension, whether it's looking at full range of motion, whether it's looking at, an active shoulder. And those are common and present in all these different movements. Well, within that, there are tons of different ways that you can look at a movement, right? And so I think that I always saw Power Monkey as like a deep dive into, we have the common movement themes at the level 2 course, and going to Power Monkey, to the course was really just solidifying all of that, but then also sort of challenging me to think about what are the different ways that I can coach an athlete, and how do different progressions work toward different end results, and what are things that I'm missing in my own coaching. And so, even just some of the progressions that you guys have used, or some of the Olympic lifting components, CrossFit might not deep dive into those at the level 1 or the level 2 course. The principles are there, right? But that's not necessarily the focus of the course. So then you have this landscape where you guys are deep diving into a couple different or a couple specific areas, and that only furthers your coaching. I mean, it's sort of silly, but when I did Power Monkey's course, you can laugh at me, but I had been like a competitive-ish like regional level athlete, and I just remember, like, anytime there was an Olympic lift, I was just like, I don't know how people do that. Like, I practice all the time, I do this, and like, there's obviously something I'm doing wrong. But I mean, it was probably 7 years.
Yeah.
It was 7 years of just not having that aha moment. And then when I did the course and thought about, okay, what does hip extension look like in relation to bar path and the heel for me? And then what does that look like on other athletes? I just had this whole new avenue to coach all of my athletes that I'd never had before. And so I think, I don't know, I just see that for any coach, level 1 all the way through level 4, the moment that you start thinking that, well, number one, the moment that you start thinking that you're not going to get anything out of a course, I think is the moment that you're sort of cut off from developing as a coach. I would guess for both of you, like, you're not coaching the same way you did 10 years ago. It doesn't mean you've abandoned the principles of Olympic weightlifting, the principles of gymnastics, but, and that's the same thing. Like, I am so rooted in the principles and the methodology of CrossFit, and all the different pieces that I've picked up along the way only make me better at applying the methodology to all the different people that I coach. So I think that anybody going to the course, no matter their level, it gives them new ways to think about coaching and performing the movements, and it gives them a way to to coach athletes that might be a little bit different, and you never know what a specific athlete might need, right? And even Chad, I was watching the other day, I was watching the old slow motion voiceover that you did with CrossFit on the clean and jerk when you were analyzing your movement, you know, and specifically in that you talk about, you know, your lines and angles and what those adjustments meant for your bar path and your movement pattern, right? And that's a deep dive, right? As you get to be better to coach as a coach, just being able to look at different bodies and say, okay, all these primary points of performance or all these principles need to be here, but it's going to look a little bit different based on this person's lines and angles. And I think you get that going to different, you know, going to courses and learning.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think, as you mentioned, compared to 10 years ago, I think I know far better what the principles are, the priorities of teaching should be with the Olympic lifts, the basics, and I'm more focused on them than ever. So I think there's a lot to be said of, you know, a coach really thinking about that occasionally, at least, and say, hey, where was I when I started 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was? Can I remember some of the things that I was teaching and saying, and how is that different now? Is it different? Because I feel like if it's not, then you probably need to reach out to other areas, or you need to do something different. And certainly I've learned so much from, I don't think I'd be near as good of a weightlifting coach or teacher if CrossFit never existed. You know what I'm saying? If I was just a coach of Olympic lifting, because I can see the difference in the way that I was taught. Not to say that my coach or the guys that I came across weren't incredible weightlifting coaches. They were, but they didn't have this mixture of knowledge from different sports, from different disciplines to bring into just training in general, you know, strength and conditioning and movement and everything else. So I think we have created different levels, you know, overall better coaches. And in fact, I mean, there are a lot of weightlifting coaches from the CrossFit community that have taken a special interest in the Olympic lifts, for example, that I would say are better technical teachers and coaches for Olympic lifting than, you know, almost any coach 20 years ago. And I hope that people don't take that the wrong way, but it's just the nature of the game and what CrossFit has done. And, you know, to add on to this whole conversation, you mentioned something about how you've benefited from moving through Mike Service's weightlifting programming, for example. So how do you think that plays a role in, you know, these coaches that you're talking about being professionals, being better coaches? We talk about it all the time. And if someone tells me, for example, they want me to come do a coach's clinic, what are the differences in your coach's clinic in if you're just doing a general athlete clinic? Not a lot. There's really not. It's almost, I mean, I may say a few little different things. Some of those things may just be to entertain this idea of needing to be different from a coach's clinic and an athlete's clinic, but the principles are the same. I need you to be aware of certain things as an athlete and the same things as a coach. And we need to have a common language that we speak. So why am I teaching different methods to different groups of people? And I always tell coaches, if you want to be the best coach that you can be, then you need to be an athlete. You better be snatching and clean and jerking. If you want to be the best athlete that you can be, you'll benefit if you try to coach a little bit. You don't have to be a coach, but if you'll watch other people move and lift, and if you think what their issue is and how you might fix it, you're going to be a better athlete as well. So how has that played a role for you, and how important is that for other coaches?
Yeah. I can't, this sounds cheesy now, but I mean, every injury and every time I've really just said, I'm going to work my weakness, I have grown almost more as a coach than I have as an athlete. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I just love about CrossFit is that, you know, whether it was being pregnant the first time, being pregnant the second time, you know, almost tearing my hamstring off my body on a stretch at first base during intramural softball, not, you know, looking at, you know, all my strengths and weaknesses as an athlete and saying, my inability to snatch is the single biggest hole in my fitness period. And I'm going to spend some time addressing that. And so I think on a broad scale, anytime as an athlete you commit to a program that addresses something that you have an athlete gap in, it inevitably always carries over, from my experience, to filling a gap you had as a coach. And so with Mike, when he came and did the Power Monkey course, I mean, I'm so geeked out on this stuff. I was just like, oh my God, maybe I don't have to snatch 115 pounds for the rest of my life. This is amazing. And so I asked him if he ever worked one-on-one with people. And so I spent the next 8 months working with him. And in that process, it changed my understanding it evolved my understanding of how to connect midline to squat end range of motion, how to actively move shoulders into a better position through movement rather than, just twisting bands on a bar. Not that there's anything wrong with that. This is going to sound super silly, but another big aha moment was when you watch top athletes perform movements like a moderately heavy snatch or clean and jerk, there is an element that it looks effortless. And I think learning how to work the corner of every single end range position all the time was a huge additional aha moment. And to kind of take it back to the CrossFit piece, right? So if you take the 5 primary points of performance for the air squat, I know that, if you try to do all 5 of those perfectly every time, you are worked. I had a gap where I didn't take all of that into the bottom, the receiving position of a snatch or the finish position, all these different places. And it was this whole new place of, oh my gosh, I can work hard in all these areas. That then, the gap for me, the harder part was then, how do I communicate that to my athletes? Because once I started coaching people more in depth in Olympic lifting, it's hard to sometimes communicate the feeling that you have from doing an exercise, right, into what your athletes should be doing to achieve it. So that was just another, kind of another step forward. As a fun part of that story, I knew when in working with Mike, I knew along the way that I was getting better. I was doing 2, maybe 3 sessions a week and then just going to class. And it was the year that it was 65, 95, 135 pound snatches with pull-ups and toes to bar or something. I don't know. And I'd never snatched 135 pounds, period. Not even working with Mike. In terms of going up, I knew I was getting a lot more technically proficient, and I knew things felt slow as fast almost. But anyways, I got to the open and I ended up snatching 135 pounds 11 times.
Nice.
And that was what really tied that thing together of you know what? And actually Mike said this, and you guys, this is something that I've always tried to communicate to my CrossFit athletes. And this was actually a good example of how the course, the deep dive that you guys provide, just reinforces what we talk about with CrossFit. The average CrossFitter, they don't need to get stronger to snatch their body weight. They don't need to get stronger to have a 1.5 times clean and jerk body weight, clean and jerk. Because they can deadlift 300 pounds and they can deadlift 450 pounds, right? They're not technically proficient at all the pieces. So it's you almost have this beautiful platform where look, we give you this strong athlete. Now just let them work sub-maximally or, however you want to phrase it, and just hone in on just get the basics right. And then it doesn't matter, all of a sudden it just comes together and it's, 10, 20, 30 pounds more on a barbell that you never thought you could lift. I think that's those are the aha moments that really, I mean, I still remember that. Like, most CrossFitters are way stronger than they are technically proficient at the Olympic lifts. Now, that doesn't mean that that's bad or wrong, right? That's just,
And
okay, let's
and
acknowledge
gymnastics.
that.
And
What's
gymnastics.
that?
No, Dave. No, we're talking about weightlifting today. No gymnastics.
It's fine.
Weightlifting.
It's fine.
The weightlifting
We're not
conversation.
talking about
Majority
my
of CrossFitters are
walking.
way stronger than they are technically proficient in weightlifting and gymnastics.
It is true. It is true.
But okay, so, and here's the thing though, is like, you know, we don't have to like, okay, so if that's the premise, right, then let's, as coaches, say like, wow, we have so much that we can work with. And then the next step is, how do we work with it better? That's just becoming a better coach. In the same way, like, you know, if I had an athlete that came to me and they were a gymnast, you know, oftentimes, right, like their ability to apply technique to an Olympic lift is great to start with. And then, you know, how do I make sure that that they're getting stronger along the way? Well, they need to keep going to group class and, you know, progressively get stronger in class. But you know, I'm making generalizations, but it's like that's not a bad thing. It's just, okay, well, what do we do with it? And I think the Power Monkey course there was like a big linkage for me there. But circling back to your question, I think that anytime you choose to work a weakness, work an injury, do something that fills a gap for you as an athlete, is always going to pay off in your coaching. And you'll learn so much along the way by doing that. And it's also, you know, probably one of the better examples that you can set for your athletes in a bigger, you know, on a larger scale. I mean, I know you guys, you know, you guys do the other's discipline. You guys are always connecting the dots. And that's how you connect the dots.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but I probably do gymnastics better than Dave, but we don't have to have that conversation. But no, first of all,
wait, before you go on, I know Chad is incredibly pissed about this, but Nicole, you've mentioned Mike Service more times than Chad likes to speak that man's name.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was about to say.
We just have to show some.
I was about to say, congratulations for putting up with Mike for 8 months. That's an incredible accomplishment in itself, right there.
Mike is an incredibly important part of what we do, but you definitely are on Chad's bad side for mentioning how great of a coach he is that many times. So just put that out
Chad,
there.
you have to come out to Boulder and do a course out here.
Yeah, I mean, I might have to try to take him down a little bit, but no, he is absolutely very good at what he does, and you know, I'm honored to say that I've been a part of that. You know, a part of him learning from me, but also I've learned a lot from him. So let's don't let him hear this recording, because I don't want him to hear that. But yeah, it's true for sure. Now, I have to ask, one of the you brought up Air Squad, and as Dave probably assumed I was going to say something about that.
I should probably leave now. Yeah, I don't think I need to be on the rest of the podcast. No, you're
done for the day. You're done. Now. Well, but the Air Squad is taught in CrossFit in a certain way, and as you mentioned, you're talking about with Mike, you worked on the in ranges of your squat. I'm assuming you're meaning the in ranges of your squat, what I like to call the realistic demands of the Olympic lifts when you're snatching and cleaning heavy. If you're snatching and cleaning anywhere near what you're capable of, you're going to be forced down to in ranges. That's different than what is taught in CrossFit in regards to hip crease below knee being the minimum standard. Now, I said minimum standard, but I also understand that many coaches coming out of the level 1 certification, and honestly, probably a lot that teach the level 1 certification just through the years, have made that inadvertently the standard. So no higher, no lower. It's got to be that and nothing else. So for you to understand the difference, I'm assuming you understand the difference. At what point with your athletes do you take them from, you know, minimum standard hip crease below knee air squat teaching into saying, okay, if you're taking an extra interest in the Olympic lifts, I need you to squat a little bit differently or a lot differently, and we maybe need to check your mobility and work on these things so that you are better prepared for the Olympic lifts? Is it the fact of them taking an extra interest, or is there a certain time in each of their CrossFit journeys, whether they take a special interest or not, that you try to teach them something different. Because in the end, to me, I don't really have the answer, to be honest with you, as a CrossFit coach. I've struggled with that. But in the end, CrossFitters are Olympic lifters too. If there's a heavy snatch or a heavy clean and jerk that pops up in class programming, I always ask, are you going to do that? Are you going to lift as heavy as you possibly can? And 95% will raise their hand and say yes. So my thinking is, okay, if that's true, then at some point we have to squat differently than the initial air squat teaching, really in almost in every way, and especially the hip crease below knee part of it.
Right. I mean, I think holistically, when we look at the primary points of performance, our main goal is to get all of them in check, right? And so there's, like you said, we have that kind of minimum standard. But even if we just go back to the methodology with CrossFit, we're trying to increase work capacity across broad time and modal domains, right? And so the, moving large loads long distances quickly, well, if we move them a longer distance, right, we have a greater ability to generate, higher intensity, more power. And so I think there's a number of factors at play. And I think it comes back to one, yes, your first step is getting those primary points of performance in line. And then moving an athlete further in those should just really be the natural extension of good coaching, right? And so if we, I look at it with a wall ball, and there's an element of obviously like a game standard too, or a standard for a range of motion, right? Just, if you look at a competitive standpoint, right, the crease of the hip has to be below parallel. Now, in no place does CrossFit or education say, that minimum standard, just get your crease, the hip like slightly below parallel and you're good. We're trying to increase that range of motion throughout time. And so I think that goes back to that bigger overarching concept with your athletes. Like if all you ever demand is the minimum standard, right? And that's not just for the squat, that's for any movement, right? Well, right. That's the level of athlete that you're going to progress with. And so in a way you can apply that same logic to a number of different things. You can look at, a kettlebell swing. If your minimum standard is that you get the bell over your head, well, what does your elbow position look like? What does your shoulder position look like? What's your midline doing? Yep. And so I think if we rely on these movements to just have sort of the check the box, the range of motion was hit, well, then as long term, we're just limiting the capacity of our athlete. And so I think that from with the squat, I think that again just becomes that coaching day in and day out. I think it's being able to have the conversation with athletes and say that, hey, I want you to squat lower. And if, why? Because you can. Yeah. Because you can, and because you can, and then how do you reinforce that over time? Some of the things that we've done at the gym that are just, they're legitimately fun days, and people, it's sort of a fun thing, but we'll set up boxes for people to squat to, and everybody goes and gets a med ball, and you're like, that's only going to work if you're like 6'7". Like that's not happening. We're like, go get the 8-inch box, like 8 inches. And so expanding that perception of how hard they can work in those bottom positions to be able to achieve a greater range of motion. So I don't know if I gave you a specific answer, but I think honestly, it's rooted in connecting the dots for athletes in terms of what they want to be able to achieve, and then having a constant ability to reinforce that through the movements that people are doing in class, and have the conversation. Like, we talk about all the time, like, I shouldn't have to get out like a ruler and look across the gym and not be able to sure if you're below parallel. And how do you establish that for the athlete? So I think it's a bigger concept than sort of the minimum standard. It's saying like, what's the fitness goal?
It sounds like it's coming back a lot to what we preach endlessly, Chad, this idea of not training towards a standard. We don't train towards standards. We train towards the highest level version of any movement and then apply that movement mechanic to the standard. So it kind of is a little bit of a different approach in terms of how do we get to that standard. So instead of saying, okay, minimum standard is hip crease at or below parallel, we're going to be training towards the highest level version of the application of that squat, which would be to a heavier snatch or whatever it might be, and what is the requirement in that particular movement, and then work backwards from there.
Well, and so think about it too in like a bigger, like think if you take fitness in 100 words, right? It says, you know, train the basics of like L-sits and pirouettes and handstand walking, and
we need more of that.
Well, and I agree. As a CrossFit, as a community, it's the same thing in a way to say, we're just gonna, I don't know if that's me, but we're just gonna get below parallel in a squat, to say that like, hey, once you get once you can hold a handstand for 5 seconds, you're good. Or once you can do an L sit for 30 seconds, you're good. Like there's not like a minimum standard in all of these different things. We're trying to push the limit in every single possible direction in all of these skills. And I think, you go back and you read Fitness in 100 Words, and there's a lot of people that we have, not people, but like there's a lot of, okay, I got my first muscle up. Whew, okay, I'm good. No. That's like just the start. That's the start. How do you make that muscle up better technically? And then once you have the ability to do 10, what does that look like to hold a 4-pound med ball between your feet? And so I think that that's the beauty to me with CrossFit, is that it is never ending. It's this never ending pursuit of more range of motion in your squat, more ability to hold a better overhead position, against a wall, and then being able to take that into your handstand walking. And as coaches, that really falls back on our responsibility, because I'll say it, like, it's a lot easier to teach, coach box jumps and pull-ups and I don't know, kettlebell swings in the morning. Not to say that those don't have their own breadth of very technically, driven components, but we have to challenge our athletes and give them more than just saying like, we've checked the minimum standard for all these components and now we're fit.
Yeah. And that
first, and that's the hard part. It's nobody wants to hear that.
Right. And another part of that is that first muscle up was probably done with a lot of skipping steps. And so the problem with that is that athlete is satisfied with that, and they're okay with trying to learn to do more muscle ups without backtracking enough and making sure that those steps are accomplished. Now, you talked about it being about more than just a squat, and it's the same in other movements. A kettlebell swing is a great example. Like you talked about, it's not just about getting it over the top of your head, but since I am I'm always watching people squat. That's just what I do. It's just my passion. It's the most apparent thing to me. It's what I spend most of my time writing about and teaching about and everything else. And so I see the big disconnect in the community. So what percentage would you say of CrossFit coaches are like you? Like you said, it should be a natural extension of your coaching. You should just say, oh, you can go hip crease below knee now. The quality looks great. You're upright and everything is good. You can probably, if it was okay to go lower, you could probably go lower. But yet what I'm saying is that from my perspective, there's a large percentage of coaches that aren't taking that natural extension path. They're just staying at that minimum standard with, again, not just the air squat, not just squats in general, but with every movement. You've seen more people come out of these certifications than myself for sure. You've taught them. What percentage would you say it is, and where would you hope that it would be?
Oh, I don't know about percentage, but I think the root of the problem is not the coach's ability to see what's going on. It's having the hard conversation. And I think that's kind of what I was alluding to beforehand of, sort of a sign that we're growing is giving our coaches helping them have the confidence to have those hard conversations. You know, when you're on the gym floor and you're coaching and somebody's not squatting below parallel, or you just look at them and you're like, you know what, that could be better. There's an element that we have to establish in our group classes for the coach to be able to have that conversation. And I think for some coaches, it comes really naturally. And some, that's where those 6 months on the gym floor of being able to see somebody have that conversation and see how like well it went, you know, hey, it wasn't bad. And how to frame it for different people. You know, if my dad comes into the gym, he's 79. You know, if I go and tell my dad, like, hey dad, you got to keep squatting a little bit lower, because it's really going to help your dumbbell squat clean, which he does. But, you know, he's just going to kind of be like, I don't know what you're talking about, you know?
Yeah.
But if it helps him if it helps him understand that he's going to be able to move more safely to, you know, squat down onto the ground or, you know, get up out of the car or whatnot, that resonates to him. And so I think in the same way that if I tried to use that example to like my 25-year-old athlete, they're going to be like, okay, you know, we got to talk more relative to like what they're trying to achieve. So I really truly don't believe it's a matter of not seeing the like what's going on. It's having the tools to take that next step. And I do think that comes with a lot of coach mentorship. I mean, I'm sure both of you guys have examples in your athletic career of just being on the gym floor and hearing how other coaches have conversations, or even just growing up through a sport of how things were handled.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's such a huge part of it. And you know, it's something that's ongoing. I think the most important part is you being an active coach, and it being something that it's not so much technical. It's a people person job too. And you need to recognize that everyone is an individual in terms of how they respond to information, how they grow as an athlete. And so to become a better coach, you can read all the books in the world, but you need time on the floor for them to trust you, for them to be able to take that cue and say, okay, he's not just picking on me. He's telling me this because he's doing it for the benefit of me growing as an athlete. And I don't think coaches get away with that unless they have the trust of the member and the client. And that comes through time. So I think you're saying 6 months of being on the floor, of building that relationship and being there with the people on a regular basis. I think that goes a long way in being able to say, all right, I feel comfortable enough to tell this person they need to squat deeper because they know that I'm doing it for their long-term benefit.
I mean, it's no different. I mean, what's interesting to me too is like if we apply some of this to through the lens of a different sport, you know, if I have a swimmer and they have big goals, and every time, you know, they come out of a flip turn, their streamline is sloppy, just as an example, right? Like the conversation there is about what their long-term goals are and being technically proficient and all the practice that they get out of doing it, you know, 300 times in one practice over and over and over again. And so it's not specific to CrossFit, right? It's really true in any coaching arena, that conversation is really what makes great coaches have, you know, athletes that have these really wonderful long-term experiences with making continuous progress. But you know, also acknowledging that initial phase of trying to do that is hard, and also saying like, you know what, you're going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes. I've chosen the wrong time to have the discussion with the athlete. I've totally missed the mark. I've presented the information in a way that didn't resonate with them. But honestly, like, you have to do that. If you're gonna have the better conversations 12 years, 15 years into it, like, you have to mess up along the way, you know, but that's just part of the process. And so I think that's the other part is having your coaches' backs to say, you know what, like, you can always talk things through. You can always, you know, go back and work it through with the athlete. And if your coaches know that that's something that you're always going to help them with, either flushing out the process, then it creates a place where they're willing to try, you know? And I think that's really important for coach development.
And you've been working on so many resources within CrossFit to be able to give those coaches better routes to be able to work with the clients that come to their gym. And one of them is a professional coach, which I'd love for you to touch on in terms of how it's applied as a resource and what coaches can really get out of it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So as part of training and education, the department launched a monthly newsletter that goes out to all the current level 1 through level 4 trainers, as well as those that have taken an online course. And it's a newsletter that is specifically for the CrossFit trainer population. And it's long form content, deep dives into areas of, you know, what makes for great coaching, profiling some of our top coaches in the industry, looking at coach analysis, and also really deep diving into corners of the methodology, whether it applies to performance or health or, you know, anything in between. And when we talked about that academic approach to coaching, it's sort of a way to keep the conversation going in a way that gives trainers tools to keep developing that might not necessarily apply. They might not apply that piece of information the very next day on the gym floor, but when you take that over the course of 1 month, 3 months, 8 months, a year, you have this increased breadth of knowledge that then who knows how it's going to apply along your coaching journey, but it absolutely will play a role. And so it's the second issue comes out tomorrow, actually, on the 13th of July. And it's just been really neat to be able to put something together that's specifically for the CrossFit coaching population.
That's super exciting. Are you writing articles as well? I know you've had a blog for a very long time that you kind of continuously adding to. Is this something that you're writing, or are you kind of just facilitating the overall kind of structure of it?
Yeah, both. So I have an amazing team. We have a content team with Matt Swift and Stefan Roche, and the two of them, the three of us work together to write and curate and pull together the content. And then obviously it's under the direction of Nicole Carroll, and really just nourishing that CrossFit coach profession and growing it.
Love it. Well,
I do some writing and some curating.
Fantastic. Well, we had an hour here today, and this is the kind of conversation that we can probably have a few more hours on, being that it's such an important topic for the CrossFit community, not just the coaches, but the members as well, in terms of how that interaction works. And you're at the forefront of it, Nicole, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk about where CrossFit's going with it and the role that you're playing within it all. And we're really hoping that you're going to be able to come to Power Monkey Camp for the first time in the fall. It looks like that might be a possibility. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct. I am pumped.
Excellent.
I am so excited.
Yeah, we're on to our 16th one now. So Camp 16 will be a special one. We're going to be sold out. So we're back up to our full capacity camp for the fall. So we're really excited to be able to get you out there and experience it firsthand. We know you'll have a blast, and that'll be a great time for everybody. Before we get you out, we got a couple last minute questions if you're up for them.
Sure.
Quick and painless. First one.
All right.
What sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Oh, that's mean.
Painless, depending on her answer here.
Yeah.
I'm going to say gymnastics because it's the building block of the CrossFit world for Olympic lifting.
Oh my.
Did you
oh my.
hear that? That's
I'll
coming
rely on
from
the CrossFit pyramid.
She just teased me through that whole recording. I thought for sure she was going to say weightlifting, as much as we talked about weightlifting. But
well, it's official now. That's coming from CrossFit HQ. So I'm gonna.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Well, we're
Question
about
number
what? We're about
two.
We're about 90 to 10, I think, is the score with you and I.
Yeah, we're coming up
You're
on
a
our
little
100th
ways ahead.
episode,
Yeah.
and you might have gotten to the double digits. So
Yeah.
I think we're pretty
Oh,
clear
most
that
people say gymnastics?
For sure.
almost everybody.
Oh, interesting. Now I feel bad. I was,
Even
trying to even it
Service,
out.
even Service, like
Mike said, wait, Mike was diplomatic. He said
yeah, he
they're
was
equally
diplomatic,
important.
but that's only
Mm.
because he didn't want to not say weightlifting. He really wanted to say gymnastics. I know he did.
All right, question number two. Is there any guest that you think would be great for us to have on the podcast?
Ooh, Matt Swift or Stefan Roche.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
There's two, but they both have so much knowledge and they have different backgrounds.
That sounds great. That sounds like 2 episodes.
Absolutely. Two. That's, I mean, probably 5 to 10 really, if we wanted them, I think, with those two. But
yeah, exactly.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. All right. Next one, any books that you've come across here recently that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Ooh, yeah, but I'm gonna pull it up really quick. It's Carol Dweck's book on growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just called Mindset. Yeah, it's Mindset, the new psychology of success. I think she's a Stanford professor. My brother did his master's of education there, and I think that's where he came across her work. But from the coaching perspective, it just resonated so much to me. And I think we see it play out, what she talks about in terms of how we coach, how we give cues, how we work with athletes over time in terms of how that affects their success. I think it really, it's incredibly applicable.
Does she actually write and teach from a coaching perspective? Is she a coach?
No, she's not. It's a little bit more from an educational standpoint, but the principles they all apply. And you can see it, you can see it with, you can take what she says and watch coaches coach and really pull out like how they can improve or what they're doing really well and how that affects the athletes that they work with. It's
awesome.
Really neat. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that. We'll add it to the list. We've got a long list there, and
cool.
one I hope to get to in the future for sure. Appreciate you coming on, Nicole. It was a pleasure to get to know you a little bit more. Hopefully we can see you out there at Power Monkey Camp in the fall, as Dave mentioned. Anything else you have coming up you want folks to know about, or maybe even, I know that there's a lot of coaches out there that are interested in working themselves to a level 4 CrossFit trainer. Just a brief explanation of how that process works.
So we have the 4 levels of credentials in CrossFit. The level 1 and the level 2 are certificate courses, which basically means that everything that you're tested on is delivered to you within that 2-day course. And so those certificate courses, the level 1 obviously is the entry level to the methodology and to CrossFit, as well as learning the movements. And then the level 2 is a deep dive into coaching, and it's very specific for coaches. It's a much smaller course, and it really starts to dive into cues and how they work with athletes, and seeing and correcting, and really bringing to life the 6 criteria that we look at in coaching. So teaching, seeing, correcting, group and gym management, presence and attitude, and then demonstration. From there, we move into the certification realm. So the certification realm, the CCFT, Certified CrossFit Trainer, is the first that becomes a certification. And that is a exam that you go to a testing site, and it's a large number of questions. And that earns you the title of level 3 trainer. And then the CrossFit certified coach, the CrossFit level 4, is the top level. And that one, we probably will see that, I'm guessing, come back at some point. It came offline a while ago, but it's a practical application. So it's teaching, live teaching and coaching. And then that's the level 4.
You officially become a Jedi at that point.
Yeah.
Jedi Knight.
It does sound
Jedi
very
Knight.
Yeah,
Nicole Carroll gets out the sword and there's a knighting ceremony.
It really does sound pretty intimidating, though. I mean, I took the level 2, and just the little test that you take where you teach a movement that was, I mean, I was fairly comfortable just because I've done it so much, but it's still intimidating. And I can't even imagine being up there at the level 4 and having a similar test there. But where can people find this information and get going on it?
Yeah, so they can go to CrossFit.com. And when you pull up CrossFit.com, up in the corner, you can see training. And then there's a drop-down menu, and you can look at certificate courses as well as certifications and read about each one of those levels, as well as look at different continuing education credit options if you have if you've passed the level 3 and have to have CEUs every 3 years.
Perfect. Well, to our listeners, be sure to check that out, especially if you're interested in being the best coach that you can be and having those credentials that are really far more meaningful than just the titles that they provide. Also, be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. As Dave mentioned, sounds like we're sold out for Camp 16, but if you're interested, then start looking into Camp 17 or Camp 18.
It's already up there. May 1st through the 7th. Registration is already up for 17.
Perfect. And we would certainly love to have any of you guys there for the first time, second time, third time. How many times have we had a few people there, Dave? 7
Over
or 8
10
at
now.
this point?
Over 10.
Incredible. So hopefully you guys can join us for that if you haven't already. Also, check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.